This is the program where the Kansas stars come to shine and share their stories. This week we welcome a Wichita native who is one of history's most admired and acclaimed television journalists.
President Obama had more words today for the health insurance industry.
Jim Lehrer is a journalism icon, rising to national acclaim as anchor of the evening newscast on PBS for several decades. He began that job in 1975, first teaming up with Robert McNeil, and then going solo in 1995 on what was rebranded the News Hour with Jim Lehrer, now the News Hour. Along the way, Lehrer established himself as a fair and forthright journalist, always in control and always ahead of his story. His Kansas work ethic and sensibilities took him a long way from those early days growing up in a modest Wichita neighborhood. Lehrer cut his chops in the journalism business as a newspaper reporter in Dallas, where he covered the assassination of President Kennedy. Through the decades, he would be front and center reporting on all major historic events. From Watergate to 9/11 to the election of the first African-American president, Jim Lehrer was there. He has moderated 12 presidential debates, interviewed the world's most important power players, and set a standard for journalism that few have ever matched. All the while, Lehrer has been a prolific author of novels, finding his escape from news in the world of make-believe. Now retired and in the twilight of his years, Jim Lehrer is reflecting on the successes and failures of his amazing life and sharing what he has learned along the way. There's so much to talk about and only 30 minutes to do it. So let's get started. Jim Lehrer, one-on-one, right now. Hello and thanks for joining us. I'm Victor Hogstrom. It's a pleasure to welcome legendary journalist and Wichita native son, Jim Lehrer, to the program. Jim, it's wonderful to have you.
It's wonderful for me, Victor. This is Wichita, Kansas is where it all started for me, and it means everything to me.
Welcome back home.
Thank you.
How often do you come back?
Well, I've used to come back very frequently because I'd come to Wichita when I was writing books. And I'd come here, instead of going to the beach or to the mountains or something to go get away and write, I would come to Wichita. And I was very comfortable here, and I would stay in Old Town.
For the inspiration?
Well, I don't know what it was. There's a lot of fiction writers, good fiction writers will tell you that that you ought to go back, if you possibly can, to what you were thinking when you were 16 years old, when you were still making up stories, and you somehow get your head there when you are, even no matter how old you are, later,
right.
And writing. And so maybe it was a device for me to go back to my childhood so I could make up stories. I don't know what it is, but I loved it. I loved it.
So tell us about those childhood days, those growing up days.
Well, I was born at Wesley Hospital, and then we lived in near right there, the canal and Douglas Avenue. I lived on Ash Street, went to Willard Elementary School, and World War II came. Mm-hmm. And that was a big deal in our lives. It was my mother and father and my brother, who was 2 years older. We had a good life in Wichita. My dad started working for the Southern Kansas Stage Lines, which became Santa Fe Trailways, and then he was a bus man. And he started his own bus company. Went from the Eaton Hotel was where our bus depot was, and we went over to Valley Center, Sedgwick, Newton, North Newton, Gossel, Lehigh, Hillsboro, all around. We ended up in one line in Emporia, another in McPherson. Unfortunately, it didn't make it. The bus line didn't make it. After a year, he had to file bankruptcy, which is a terrible thing for him. But it was great fun for my brother and me. We would ride the buses on weekends and all this sort of stuff. But my memories of Wichita, with the exception of the difficult problems for my mother and dad because of the bus line, are all upbeat and wonderful. That's had a great. I went to Willard Elementary. The teachers there were fabulous, and I went to College Hill Elementary. The same thing. I felt like I got a good beginning, about learning. Wichita. I mean, Kansas was one of the few states then that had kindergartens.
Oh.
That's a relatively new thing.
Right. So what prompted the move to Texas?
Well, the bus line went broke, and Dad had to find a job. So we were a busman by then. So we went to work for a small bus company in southeastern Kansas called Kansas Trails, which that was independence. Then from that didn't work really well for him. So we ended up going to Texas first to Beaumont, Texas, where my dad became the bus terminal manager, Trailways terminal manager in Beaumont. And from then it was we just moved from bus stuff to first part of my life was moving from town to town because of my dad's job in the bus business, and in many ways that was a terrific thing, Victor, because you go to a school and I don't know if this is going to work or not, but if it doesn't matter because we're going to be moving from here anyhow. But it also taught me at least, kind of the skills of going into a classroom in the middle of a school year, not knowing anybody in there, not having one friend, and making it. In other words, making a life out of that. And I think it did me well. And all of that, as I say, those early years were very formative for me.
But you always seem to have returned to Wichita.
Yeah.
Wichita's always been on your mind.
Absolutely. And I think it's because of those things that meant so much to me as growing up. And even when I would come to Wichita in the last few years and do my writing and all that, it would trigger memories. And like my brother, my dad had been a Marine in the 1920s, and when World War II came, he made sure that we went. My brother and I, he took us to Union Station to greet the soldiers and Marines who came through on the troop trains on their way to California and to the Pacific. They would stop in Wichita, let the troops out, smoke and walk around, not out of the terminal, so out of the station, but we would go and point up there and wave to them, and they would wave back to us. And it was all, and I was always haunted by the fact that these young people were going off to the war in the Pacific, and many of them were going to die. And so it meant something to wave to these guys. And they would, Marines and sort of wave down because it was the viaduct over there at Union Station, and all of that kind of stuff. In fact, I ended up writing a novel that was based on that experience. It all came back to me when I went there to do something, and that happened to me a lot, and always will.
So you went back to Texas, you moved to Texas, finished high school.
Right.
Then what?
Well, I went to a little junior college in South Texas, and between San Antonio and Houston, actually the town is Victoria, which is on the Gulf Coast, and if you're looking at a straight line, it's between Houston and Corpus Christi. But at any rate, we couldn't afford to go. We wanted to go to the University of Texas. My brother was already going to the University of Texas. We couldn't afford for two of us to go even to Austin to school. But it wasn't so much that because the tuition was next to nothing, but it was room and board and all that sort of. Even with a job, it would have been just. Dad said, "Hey, forget it." So my dad then became the manager of the bus depot in Victoria. So we moved to Victoria, and he said, "I think there's a junior college there, son. Good luck." And so there was, and I found it, and started going to school there. And two things happened. First of all, I had already decided by then I wanted to be a journalist or a writer, because that had happened earlier when I was in high school in Beaumont. But now I just graduated from high school at San Antonio. We're in Victoria, and I went to Victoria, this little college. Victoria has a student body of 300 people. And I became the editor of the paper just by volunteering to be looking for a way to work on the paper. And he said, the guy, the faculty advisor said, "Congratulations, you're the editor." That was it. And I also then got a job working in, my dad was then gone by then from Victoria, and I got a job as a ticket agent in the Trailways Bus Depot. It was another formative experience for me, which is, because it was the real world. People, all kinds of people came in at Bus Depot. And I learned how to call the buses and all. You want me to call a bus?
Go ahead.
All right. This is, as I say, it's between Victoria and Corpus Christi.
Right.
May I have your attention, please? This is your last call for Continental Trailways, 8:10 p.m. Silverside's air-conditioned through-liner to Houston, now leaving from lane 1 next to the building. For Inez, Edna, Ganado, Louise, El Campo, Pierce, Wharton, Hungerford, Kendleton, Beasley, Rosenberg, Richmond, Sugar Land, Stafford, Missouri City, and Houston. All aboard! Don't forget your baggage, please.
Wow.
Now, do you know anybody else who can do that?
No.
Do you know if anybody else would want to know how to do that? No, but it also proves a point that if you learn something early,
Right.
and it's totally irrelevant, you'll never forget it. You know.
That's true.
Yeah.
So you got into the junior college.
Yep.
And after junior college?
University of Missouri, and I was working at the bus depot, and at night we had a typewriter in the back of the bus depot, and I'd already decided I wanted to go to, wanted to be a journalist, and they didn't call them journalists, and they called them newspaperman, but and I had made a list of schools that taught journalism,
right.
and Missouri was on the top of every list.
Right.
So I just wrote a letter, and they sent my transcript and all that, and Missouri wrote back and said, "We're so sorry, but," because I wanted to go as a junior, because journalism school was junior and senior year, and they said, "Wait, we don't never heard of your school. We can't verify anything. We could maybe accept you as a provisional sophomore." Well, that was just awful. So anyhow, one of those pivotal points in my life where somebody came to my rescue. I showed the letter to the dean, the guy who ran the little junior college, and he was an old football player, and it really made him mad, to read,
that no one ever heard of the school, right?
So he says to me, he says, "Jimmy, do you really want to go to the University of Missouri?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I really do." He said, "Oh, are you ready to roll the dice?" And so anyhow, he said, "Look, here's what I'm going to do." So he wrote a letter in response to this, to the admissions department of Missouri, and said, "Look, you send us the tests for these 5 subjects that you will not give him credit on, and we'll administer them under any conditions that you outline, whatever, on the condition that if he passes them, you'll admit him as a junior to the journalism school." Well, an anonymous person in Missouri said, "Okay, you're on." So they did send the test. They admitted it one Saturday. I took all these tests. It was history and English grammar and Spanish, and I aced them. And they admitted me not only as a junior, but as an advanced junior. And
wow.
But it was all because of this guy.
Right.
This man was Dean Stormont, John Stormont, and that got me to Missouri. But it was not only him, but it was also whoever this guy was at the admissions department at the University of Missouri. Yeah.
And so you graduated. And
became a second lieutenant of the United States Marine Corps. At that point in time, this was 1956. There was still the draft, so the only choice anybody, an able-bodied American male, the only choice you had is what branch of the service you were going to go in. Mm-hmm. I chose the Marines because of my dad. He had been a Marine. My older brother was already in the Marines by then, and so I just signed up for an officer's program. And then when I signed up for that, and I went in the summertime, I went to Quantico and had to form a boot camp for officers, and then I was commissioned. On the day I graduated, I then walked with my mother and dad over to the Navy ROTC building, and I was sworn in as a second lieutenant. Went on to the Marines for 3 years, and I was an infantry officer, which is a very special thing in the Marines. Mm-hmm. And special meaning that you get to walk in the mud and in the rain and all this sort of stuff. But it was another life-changing experience for me.
Did you do journalism in the Marines?
No. Didn't want to do journalism. I was just going to do it for 3 years. I was only on active duty for 3 years, and I knew that. I wasn't going to make a career of the Marines. I was just going to be there 3 years. So the one thing what I did do I spent most of my time with the 3rd Marine Division in Okinawa, which was when we went on deployed to all kinds of funny places. Never, we were supposed to scare the daylights out of the Chinese. There were 1 billion Chinese, and there were 1,500 Marines, that kind of thing. It was no big deal.
Right.
But at any rate, I had a lot of downtime. You have it, that kind of. So I had time to write. So I wrote all kinds of I wrote 30-some short stories while I was in the Far East, and not one of them has ever been published, and didn't deserve to be published probably. I didn't think so at the time, but I didn't do any journalism. But when I got out, that's when I went to work in Texas for the Dallas Morning News, and then I was in journalism.
And you covered some major stories, including the assassination of President Kennedy.
I did.
Right.
I did.
So how did you go from newspaper journalism to broadcast journalism?
This happened, I was then the city editor of the afternoon newspaper in Dallas, the Dallas Times-Herald. And I'd written a novel, my first novel that was published, Viva Max, and it was about the retaking of the Alamo in current times, and it was made into a movie starring Peter Ustinov and all of that. And my wife Kate and I, the end result of it's an involved thing, but the end result was we got $45,000 for the movie when it all turned. And so Kate would say, well, our plan of life, Kate's and my plan of life, had been always to go to Paris and live and write, because Kate also was an novelist.
So at what point did you meet Kate in your life?
When I first got out of the Marine Corps and was living with a guy I had gone to Missouri with, who had just gotten out of the Army at the same time, was already working at the Dallas Morning News, and so there were 2 other guys, so 4 of us were living in an apartment house in East Dallas, and it was kind of what passed for swinging singles in Dallas, Texas at that moment. And the apartment house, there happened to be this gorgeous woman who had just moved into this apartment house. I hadn't been there very long myself, and she was just down the hallway with 3 other. She had 3 roommates, and it was Kate Tom Staples of McKinney, Texas, who was a 7th grade English teacher, and I met her. 2 weeks later, I proposed to her.
Wow!
And she said yes. Then the next day, she crawfished on me and said, "Oh, I didn't," because I woke up on all my roommates and said, "Oh, we're going to get married," Kate, and I told Kate the next day, because we were not cohabitating. We were in the same building, but we were not going. But I would get up in the morning and kind of hand her to the carpool so she'd go teach school. Right. I said, "Everybody's so excited," and she said, "About what?" And I said, "Well, we're getting married." And she said, "Oh, I didn't mean right now." And of course, by then, at any rate, she, as I say, she crawfished on me a little bit. But a few months later, we did in fact get married, and
you've been married for
58 years.
58 years.
50
I was going to say 60.
Yeah.
But that's still remarkable.
It is remarkable.
So then, tell us, how did you get into the broadcast side?
Well, when Viva Max, when I got the movie money and all that sort of stuff. Being city editor of the Dallas Times, it was a cheap, not really great newspaper. Had few resources, but it was. I would work every day, 6 days a week, and I would go to work at 5, 6 in the morning, because we had 8 or 9 during the day. We had 8 or 9 deadlines, and it was just like with very few. By the time the publisher had all his friends and relatives' luncheons covered, we didn't have anybody to cover. There didn't have reporters to cover the news. Anyhow, it was exhausting, and but I learned a lot. But it was exhausting. And when we got the movie thing, that's when Kate and I decided to go. And I was just going to write. We were going to write full time, and live off the Viva Max movie money. Public television station in Dallas, a guy who was the manager. He was even younger than I was. He didn't know. I don't think he even watched TV before he became the manager. He was a kind of he's an assistant to a president of a corporation. He was chairman of the board of the public television station in Dallas. I had met him once. He called me and said, "Look, I see that you resigned from the Dallas Times-Herald and all that to write and all that." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Would you become a consultant? Would you be interested in being a consultant? We want to develop news and public affairs program in public television."
This is KERA.
KERA, Channel 13.
Right.
And I said, do you all do any news and public affairs? And he said, no, but we want to. And he said, and he offered me a job where I would only have to work 2 days a week. And he was going to pay me almost as much money as I had made as city editor of the Dallas Times-Herald, which, as I say, was a cheap newspaper.
Right.
Anyhow, what happened then is this guy's Bob Wilson is the name of the manager of the station. He had an idea to follow up on the newsroom concept that had started in San Francisco and had gone elsewhere, where they had a newspaper strike in San Francisco. And what the public television station, KQED in San Francisco did, took all the reporters and the editors from the San Francisco papers and said, come and go on the air every evening. And so they did. Mm-hmm. And that Ford Foundation underwrote it. Then they said, oh, hey, this really works with other people who are interested. And so anyhow, my friend Wilson, my boss Wilson, said, hey, why don't you write a proposal for a program? And I said, you do understand, I've never been on television in my life except one little panel. So anyhow, I wrote a proposal. Lo and behold, the Ford Foundation funded it. And suddenly I was on television 5 nights a week. And I set up in Dallas, hired a staff, every one of which was a newspaper person. Former newspaper person, because some of them left newspapers to go to work. They were all from the local news, from Dallas, one of the two papers there at the time. And suddenly I was on television. And then from there, I mean, I never worked in commercial television. I went from there to Washington, and then Watergate hearings with Robert McNeil. He and I, boom, and here I am.
How did you end up with PBS nationally? Because I know the program you hosted was first started off as the
Robert McNeil Report.
Yeah. Then it became the McNeil-Lehrer Report.
That's right.
Went to the McNeil-Lehrer Newshour. Then the Newshour with
Jim
Lehrer.
And then the PBS.
And then the PBS Newshour.
That's right. That's right.
How did that happen? How did it all begin?
Well, the way it happened is that the public television, it all started because we did the Watergate hearings. And that was the first thing that we did. And we did them gavel to gavel during the daytime. And then at night, this was in August of that year, then PBS broadcast them in a repeat form that night. And it became the first time that public television had ever had a big audience for news and public affairs, and it was huge. And out of that came some momentum toward PBS doing some other public affairs programs. And WNET in New York said, well, all right, so they started this nightly show with Robert McNeil, and I was the Washington correspondent of it. And this was after Watergate. And the progress from the Robert McNeil Report to the PBS NewsHour involved several things. One of them, which we were doing what nobody else would do, which is take a serious look. In the beginning, the report itself was one story a night for 30 minutes. Then the NewsHour, but the basic concept was, and it was Robert McNeil's. He and I together developed it, but he was the main. He had the clout to get it done. Right. I didn't have any clout to get it done, but we did it together, which was to just act on the idea that people needed more information in order to become an informed voter, have an informed opinion, and that television was beginning to supplant print in such a way, but television wasn't meeting that responsibility to inform people. Public television should do it, and so that was the momentum that gave us not only the will, but then the means and the support to do it. And each step along the way was difficult. When we went from 1 hour to an hour, I mean, it was just pure hard work politics, internal politics within the public television system all over the country, to call people, talk to them, convince them to give us a chance to do the program. Then we had to raise the money, and AT&T, then a large corporation, agreed to underwrite our move to an hour. And it would never have happened if one CEO in 30 seconds, the guy's name was Charles Brown, he was the head of AT&T, said, terrific, we want to be identified with it. And they did, and they made the decision, and we were able to do all those kinds of. We had a lot of things going for us, and each step along. And the fact that we had to fight to get it from here to there I think made us stronger.
Right.
And we were much more involved in the whole total picture than we would be as just somebody working in a journalism organization. We were running the thing, but we had with power comes responsibility, and we knew it and we accepted it.
And did you and Robert McNeil become good friends?
Absolutely. I mean, we're best of friends, still are, always will be. He's a wonderful man, and he all the kinds of things that I needed to learn, he taught me. By example, or sometimes very direct. He's a very calm, cool, sophisticated, internationally traveled Canadian. I was a very uncool Kansas, Texas, international traveler. The only place I had been basically was in the Far East when I had been in the Marine Corps in Nuevo Laredo. That was about it. So I was just, but we were in absolute sync journalistically about what journalism is about, what it should be about, what we can make it be about, and even though we went at it very differently.
What is journalism about? Journalism
is about covering events that matter to people for whatever reason, and then, but they can't go to the City Hall themselves. They can't go to the Capitol themselves. They can't go to the White House. They can't go to a peace talk or whatever. So a journalist goes on behalf of the people and reports back. And so that's how people get information on which they can make these opinions. It's a kind of observe, report, so other people, not the journalists, the other people can have opinions based on facts. And it's a lot simpler than people make it out to be, but it's very difficult to execute correctly and properly, and that's why it has to be done differently to some circumstances that exist at any given time.
And you and Robert McNeil put together what has been described as the most credible newscast in America, which is now known as the PBS Newshour.
Well, and that to me is what you just said, are words that are music to my ears. And I'll accept that and say thank you very much.
And thank you for watching this edition of One on One. I invite you to join us again next week for part 2 of our continuing conversation with Jim Lehrer. Please send your questions or comments, meanwhile, to oneonone@kpts.org. I'm Victor Hogstrom. See you next time.